All right, what is up, guys? I'm back for another deck profile. So the big question right now going through everybody's head is probably, what is one of the best cheap decks you can play right now that doesn't require the adventure package and can still make deep cuts in your regular tournaments? And that was a question that I sort of wrangled with, and I decided I have quite a few of the format staples that are expensive. I have the DPE package. I did not want to spend the money on the Adventurer package or Pot of Prosperity or anything like that, so there's a couple of cards that are inaccessible due to their price. But I have quite a few of the current format meta decks right now. I do have Invoke Dogmatica, I've got Cyber's Eldritch, I've got Tri-Brigade Luralisk, and I have the branded Despia deck almost complete with a couple of cards missing. But the deck that I decided to play for this upcoming locals and regional season was actually a deck that I have loved for years, partly because of its playstyle, its lore, and the anime has never really had a fair shake at the competitive scene until now, and that's DDD. So obviously I love this deck because of all the historical references, the utilization of every single extra deck mechanic, and then also the references in the anime, the character that plays it, I always thought was really cool. But this deck has never been able to compete because, of course, right when the structure deck came out and it had the best chances of being competitively viable, we had one of the most powerful and most consistent decks ever created in Zodiac. And this deck that required like 2 and 3 card setups and a massive spreadsheet was just not viable after that happened. So the new cards introduced in Battle of Chaos not only simplified this deck tremendously, but also gave you a better payoff. So this deck is easier to play and more powerful than it ever has been before. And traditionally with this deck, you didn't really use the pendulum summoning mechanic very much. You didn't really care too much about your scales. That has changed exponentially in this build as well. You care a lot about your scales, and you're going to be pendulum summoning like crazy with this. So I did a lot of testing. I did a lot of practice. I practiced mostly against branded going into my locals recently, which also a huge shout out to Hawk's Nest Games. They're a relatively recent store that opened near me, and they are just absolutely incredible. They are run by some really passionate people who really love card games and just offer the best environment, best customer service imaginable. And they run a really awesome shop. This build is going to be mostly similar to what you've seen before with people like Pax List, or the list you'll see a lot of times in the DDD Discord and stuff like that. There's not that many noticeable differences, but I will point out some of the unique choices that I made and some of the unfortunate choices I had to make due to my card pool or the competitive environment of my locals and regionals, and I'll talk about that. But let's go ahead and just get into the list really quick. So the normal summons we have is basically 6 good normal summons. So you have your Kepler and your Copernicus. And previously with Copernicus, I never really liked this guy very much in earlier iterations of the deck. But now these two are everything you need to get your combo going. So Copernicus on summon searches a Dark Contract, which usually is Gate, which searches you any other DD. And then Copernicus is a Foolish Burial or Armageddon Knight on summon. And that can come up a lot because you can potentially, pendulum summon this guy out after going a little bit further into your combo and still get that off. The cards that you want to pitch is sometimes you can pitch like the Swirl Slime, banish it to get another guy out of your hand. You can send the Necro Slime, or I also play the Vice Typhon to banish them from the graveyard to do a fusion. So these guys are absolutely incredible, and you want to see them as quickly as possible. And we have a couple of cards that help us facilitate that. There's obviously the 3 Swirl Slime, which is what allows us to fuse from our hand. The banishing effect from the graveyard to extend further is also huge. We have one of the new cards, DD Griffin, which this card obviously is already an extender. You can special summon it from your hand when you already control a DD, which is a really great way to proc the effect of Genghis to bring a guy back. But the other part about this guy that I forgot about a lot of times, which is super important to your combo, is when it's special summoned from the graveyard, you get to search any DD card from your deck. DD card, which a lot of times is how you get the trap card. And I was misplaying quite a few times in the early matches because I wasn't figuring out how to search the trap card. It's because I wasn't utilizing the second effect of this guy. So you definitely, if you want to fuse this with the Swirl Slime to get your Genghis out, and then whatever other effect you use to proc the Genghis, you bring this back with Genghis, then you get your search, which is great. So it's incredibly versatile. and you definitely want to max out on that. I'm playing 2 Orthos. So Orthos is kind of searchable spell and trap removal because you can pop one of your opponent's back row, which came up all the time. I was popping traps and problematic back row my opponent had set, and they were really kind of freaking out because they didn't think I had a in-archetype way to get rid of that. This is also your level 4 tuner, which allows you to go into Siegfried and Baroness, which we'll get to. But also this card can be part of your combo as well, because if you scale this off of Gilgamesh, you can pop itself, and if you have Caesar or King Tell in the field, you pop them and you get their floating effects, which is part of your combo as well, and then you have a free scale that's available as well. I see a lot of people playing the 1 Cerberus. This card has never once come up for me. I'm thinking about cutting it. It is nice to be able to Pendulum Summon it and get a continuous spell back from your graveyard, which can allow you to recur one of your dark contracts, but that has never once come up for me. So I'm actually thinking about cutting this one. It hasn't seemed like it's been very useful at all. It's literally never come up. We have the other one of Pendulums, which is Thomas and Reiji and Ragnarok. So, an interesting thing about these, so Thomas is better now than ever before. You can only run the 1 because of Gilgamesh, so we used to run like 3 of these, and we'd run like some trade-ins and allures and crap to be able to draw off of this and everything. You never really get to use the monster effect, but it's a high enough scale to where when you combine it with either Kepler in scale or Reiji in scale, you can Pendulum Summon your level 4s from the top of your extra deck and your hand, which is how you get like Copernicus back, how you get Orthos back, how you get Griffin back. Like, it's so versatile. But the add back from your extra deck back to your hand is super important because that lets you either recur a Copernicus or a Kepler for next turn, which gives you some follow-up play, which I thought was just amazing because one of the greatest strong points of this deck is it is a combo deck with an insane grind game. Like, the ability to grind and play through control matches with this deck is incredible. It's one of the best reasons to play the deck. All of your extra deck guys have floating effects, and it just allows you to grind for days, and this is one of the cards that helps you facilitate that. Reiji is super important because I also hate how they've anglicized his name, because the Japanese version of this card's name was a reference to the Arc 5 manga, where they're looking for something called God, God, but it's an acronym. And so the name in Japan was Godd Divine King Zero Reiji, the Japanese name of the character, but they sort of anglicized that into Go DDD Divine King Zero Rage, which it sounds stupid. And honestly, if they had even changed it to Declan, I wouldn't have even been mad, because at least it still would have been a reference to the Arc 5 character's name. But no, we get Rage. It's up there with it's up there with like Ruddy Rose Dragon as like terrible translations for me. But being able to negate the burn damage is super important, because one of our starters, the Piri Rice map, has your life points, and so taking damage off of Gilgamesh or off of this guy or off of your Dark Contract it really does hurt a lot. So him being able to negate that is really good, and then the 0 scale is huge as well. We don't really get a chance to use his monster effect very much, but I almost always scale these 2 off of Gilgamesh. And then this one doesn't come up nearly as much anymore as it used to. It used to be essential to your combo before they added these new cards in Battle of Chaos. But the pendulum effect of it, where you can basically get another one of Genghis's revivals, is pretty cool. But you have to remember that your opponent takes half damage after you do that, because that can get you into some really huge procedural errors and rule sharking type shenanigans. So you have to remember that your opponent takes half damage after you do that. It's very easy to forget that, especially if you're playing in real cardboard or on Dueling Book or whatever. But the monster effect of this guy actually did come up. So I was in a simplified game state. I was against Branded, and he had like Titanclad on the field with like 3,700 attack, and there was nothing I had that could out it because I couldn't beat over it. And I was like, man, I don't know how to out this guy. And so everything, it was bigger than everything I had, and I was in a more simplified game state. So I just, I Pendulum Summoned out the Copernicus from the top of my extra deck, bend a Swirl Slime, banish the Swirl Slime, summon this from my hand, and its monster effect banished the Titanclad, and I attack for game. It was amazing. So don't forget that effect as well. There's interactions that are going to come up with that. You just have to really understand the different cards in this deck. The one Necro Slime and the Vice Typhon basically serve the same purpose, where it's basically just another activation of the same effect. And then this one being a level 7 also can come up if you can summon it out of your hand with the Swirl Slime effect, and then tune it with the one Lamia we have. It's another line into Siegfried. But yeah, I send these with Copernicus all the time. We also main Foolish Burial, which helps get these in the graveyard. And then I actually use it used to be before with this deck, you'd play like 3 Lamia, and you would try to revive it with Genghis before you would activate its own effect to bring it back because you didn't want it to get banished. But now we kind of do that haphazardly. Like, I don't really care so much if I activate this effect, because sometimes you want to get the Dark Contracts off the field in order to not take the burn damage, and then sometimes you'll just leave them on the field, take the 1,000 damage, and then get another search next turn, because like I said, the grind game in this deck is so important. But being able to recur this and then make Siegfried is pretty good, although we usually make Siegfried now with 2 level 4s, but the card is still really good when it comes up. I wanted to make sure that I optimized hand traps for this, so we play at least 9 hand traps. So we got Ash, we got Ogre, and we got Nibiru. So at my locals recently, Nibiru actually never came up, and I ended up siding it out a lot for a Ghost Bell against the Branded matchup. But these two came up like crazy. I actually drew into multiple Ghost Ogres one match, and it came up quite a lot. But I think this is correct, but I definitely had to make some changes in the extra deck for some better, in the side deck for some better siding patterns, because the Nibiru would come out almost every single game too, going up against Branded, to where most of my locals, especially at Hawk's Nest, was all Branded Despia, so I was like, Nibiru's not really going to come up, it's better to run Bell, but I still think that overall this was correct. Now onto the spell, so we have the Piri Rice map. So this is the part of the deck that is contentious right now. So most people are either playing this or Small World. Now, I don't want to... This is much cheaper than Small World, so if you guys are torn on which one to play, this one is a lot more affordable. And I will say that every time I activated this, I usually went full combo and won. There was only, I think, one situation where I had no choice but to activate this and to get a Kepler. And the Kepler got impermed, and I had no extension whatsoever, and so I basically lost that one. Your stuff can play through Ash and Effect Veiler pretty well, but it's more because of stuff like Call by the Grave, but it's harder to play through Imperm because you can't Call by the Grave against Imperm. Small World is good, but it's like you'd have to run some weird targets for it. One guy at Locals told me if you jam Phantasme in here, you can basically tutor for any card in your deck with Small World, which is pretty cool. I thought about that, but I didn't want to change the hand trap ratios too much. But yeah, this is kind of a preference thing if you're playing map or if you're playing Small World. A lot of people do lament the having your life points kind of thing. It is pretty rough, but you just need the consistency, and this always gets you either Kepler or Copernicus, which usually gets you off to the races. Deck is way more consistent now than it ever was. I think there was maybe only one time where I like truly bricked. 3 Gate, which is your searcher for any DD monster. You usually normal Kepler get this, and then search for Squirrel Slime or Griffin, whichever piece you're missing. Now, like I said, I usually, in the old combos of this deck, you had a built-in way to get this off of your field so you didn't continue to take damage every turn, and that was with Lamia's Resurrection effect, but now it's like you're better off just leaving it on the field and taking the damage, because, especially if you don't activate map, taking the 1,000 damage is well worth it to have a search every turn, and that just kind of contributes to the amazing grind game that this deck has. So the one Swamp King, I usually go through both Gate and Swamp King, sometimes in the same turn, in order to do my Miracle Fusing as well. This is basically Miracle Fusion for... It's just a regular generic fusion spell, technically, but it's Miracle Fusion specifically for DDs, which comes up a lot. And one of the ways you can get to this, if you've already normal summoned Kepler, is with one of the extra deck monsters, with King Tell. So that can potentially come up even after you've normal summoned Kepler. One of the new cards, Patent License, so I did not utilize this card nearly enough. So this card is crazy. It locks your opponent out of certain extra deck mechanics, burns them from 1,000. I had a lot of hands where I hard opened this, and I just forgot to activate its effect, so definitely do not do that. I'm letting you guys know the common misplays that I made so that you guys will work around those. Overall, it was actually very happy with how I piloted this deck because it's so infamously hard to play. As long as you remember to activate this to trigger this thing's effect, it's crazy. It also helps a lot with Divisor Machinex, one of the new monsters, just to have something to send to the graveyard to proc its effect as well, which is pretty cool. One Foolish Burial, like I already mentioned, sends the Swirl Slime, the Necro Slime, or even the Griffin, or the Lamia, or the Vice Typhon to the graveyard. There's a lot of good targets for that. 1-for-1 is crazy because it gets you to Lamia or to Necro Slime. I actually main deck a Feather Duster as some back row removal, but I have a lot of back row removal on the side as well. I just didn't want to overcommit to back row removal in the main board, because we're already over 40 cards as it is. And then the last card is the DDD Headhunt. This card on paper is absolutely broken, but I never really got to see this in the first day I went to locals, because I was forgetting how to actually search it because I was forgetting that second effect of Griffin. But I wouldn't say that you need to like bump this up to 3 or anything so you see it more often, because if you understand how to weave that search into your combo, you can always get this card. It's an in-archetype Crackdown that if it's a monster summon from the extra deck, it changes it to a DDD monster in name, so you can overlay Divisor Machinex onto the monster you stole. It's crazy. That's it for the main deck. So the extra deck, it is absolutely 100% correct to play 3 Gilgamesh. So I actually only own 2 at the moment. I do actually own a third, but it's in Japanese. So I need to get a third one of this. It is 100% correct to play 3. I only had 2, which is a mistake. And I will say that there's a lot of combos I've seen people do where they will go through 2 or even all 3 copies in their first turn setup line. I don't know how much I like that. I think that even though I was on 2, I tried very, very hard not to go through both of them in one turn, that I had another activation of it ready. But there's a lot of times where you get interrupted and you need to link off your Caesar or your Marksman Kingtail to get their searching effects to be able to get all the pieces you need for your combo. Sometimes it's like you have one monster and then a Gilgamesh that got like Veilered or Impermed or something, and you need to keep going, so you just link them off again for another one and try again is usually what you end up doing. So for the fusions, we have the one Dark, which the battle damage part or the effect damage part of this never came up, but it's a level 7, which if you have like the Swirl Slime or the Necro Slime in Graveyard and Lamia, it's a great way to bridge into Siegfried. Otherwise, I would have played Beowulf, which we can talk about. 2 of the small Genghis and 1 of the big Genghis. So small Genghis is obviously necessary because of your main combos. Big Genghis, I haven't procced his effect nearly as much, but the fact that he has a Spell and Trap Negate is huge. It's a Spell and Trap Negate only on your turn, which is interesting. This does come up a lot against back row decks that you're attacking into their back row, like with Eldritch, or I actually played a Paleo Frog player at locals, and as soon as he saw this, he was like, ooh, that is a problem. I need to get rid of that right away. And he didn't really have an out to it, but in game 2, he evenly matched me. So that kind of worked out in his favor. But yeah, Big Genghis is great. It's great to end on this. It would end on this card a lot next to Siegfried and Divisor Machinex. But yeah, that's it for the fusions. For the synchros, we have, of course, Siegfried. He's a great Spell and Trap Negator. He has to sort of negate the activated effect on the field type of effect as like Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss. It's that same type of negation, which is interesting. He's super easy to make with either Griffin or Copernicus plus Orthos, which is great. Don't forget as well, he has a floating effect, which almost never comes up. If he's destroyed by battle, you get to gain life points. That almost never comes up, but just don't forget about it in case it ever does, because you will forget to read that. So I didn't have Baroness going into this most recent event, and I didn't have the money for Baroness. I wasn't going to spend $120 on her, so I ran this instead as my level 10 target. So this is Doom King Bright Armageddon. It has the exact same level, so it has the exact same summoning requirements. You weave it into your combos the exact same way as Baroness. And it makes all of your DDD stuff untargetable, which is pretty good. It's also a 3500 body, which helped a lot to beat over a lot of the powerful like branded fusions and stuff like that. This also came up a lot because of the floating effect of Gilgamesh. So if Gilgamesh is destroyed by battle or a card effect, you can special summon a DD from your deck from your extra deck or your graveyard, a lot of times you think, oh, I'll just recur a combo piece from my graveyard from the top of my extra deck, like a Copernicus or a Orthos or something like that, but you can actually go as far as to summon this thing. It summons it in defense, which is unfortunate, so you can't float into another Gilgamesh with that, obviously, but you can always summon non-link monsters with it. But yeah, anything from your extra deck. I theorized that maybe that would be good for Kali Yuga. Your opponent destroys this and you just float into Kali Yuga, but Kali Yuga only gets its effect when it is specifically Xyz summoned, which means the floating effect of this will basically give you a vanilla Kali Yuga. So, but yeah, this card was it was okay. It would definitely suboptimal against Baroness, but one thing to keep in mind is that once you go through a Gilgamesh line, you're locked into DDs for the rest of that turn, which means this is still online and Baroness is not. But literally later that evening, I was like, the locals, Hawk's Nest had their Synchro Storm on discount because nobody was buying it. So I bought it and I just pulled Baroness. So I was like, yeah, there we go. So right now this is a full 15 card extra deck, but I will take this out for the third Gilgamesh once I get it. But yeah, right now we are playing Baroness. The card is insane. It wins games all on its own. You wouldn't think that just having a pop out of the gate is that strong, but it really is. And then also floating down into some of your combo pieces on your next turn to restart your combo is pretty good, as you would imagine. For the Xyz, so I never played this guy. Actually, I never played either of these back in the day, and you never really had any reason to, but thanks to Gilgamesh, these can be extenders, and they can add missing pieces of your combo to your hand. You are either going to, overlay rank 4 with your Griffin and Copernicus while you have like a Genghis on board. That can proc your Genghis, potentially, depending on where you're at with your combo. It's another summon of a DD, basically, to overlay for this guy. And then his main monster effect you're never going to use, but you're going to either pop him with Orthos, or you're going to link him off for Gilgamesh. These are just additional copies of Kepler and Copernicus respectfully. So this one has Kepler's effect and this one has Copernicus's effect. So depending on which one you need, and you really don't need to commit any extra cards to getting this one out. It just depends on which effect you need at the moment. So if you need a Dark Contract, which would eventually search you a DD, then you link this off or destroy it. And then the same thing with this one, where you either, if you need to dump, if you need to get a Swirl Slime or a Necro Slime or the Vice Type into the graveyard, same thing. One thing that's really cool about this one, though, is that it has a burn effect. You can actually target your target itself and decrease its attack and burn your opponent for 1,000, which may come up in time. You gotta be very, very careful in time with this deck because you take so much burn damage yourself from your own effects. You really, really got to be careful. But yeah, those are basically just for combos. And then of course we have the Big Caesar, Wave King Caesar, Wave King High Caesar. And this guy is a Solemn Warning on legs and is one of your end bosses. Unfortunately, you need to overlay both Genghis in order to make this guy, which makes it a little bit complicated. But not only does he have a really strong negation effect that is really well positioned right now in the current format and negates a ton of things, but he also can then boost the attack of a lot of your guys, including himself. So he gets up to some pretty ridiculous attacks. So this is usually always on your end board along with like Siegfried and the last card we're going to talk about in the, DD card, to the Divisor Machinex. So this card basically says, hey, we know the deck is complicated, so here's the most simple card you could ever ask for, and it fixes everything. So you can overlay it on top of any DDD monster, rather. So even some of the main deck ones, and obviously all of the extra deck ones. So Genghis, Caesar, Gilgamesh, all of those, you can just overlay it for free on top of them. And so if you get interrupted mid-combo, a lot of times you'll just have to make this guy. And sometimes, let's say you have Genghis on the field and your opponent Veilers or imperms your Gilgamesh effect or something like that, and you're like, I need another way to proc my Genghis. You can just overlay this on top of the Gilgamesh, and it's another summon, and it procs your Genghis, so that's really good. And then the effect to send a Dark Contract or detach 2 materials to negate a monster effect and attach that monster to it as material is insanely powerful. You're definitely going to want a Dark Contract on the field to send off of that, because when you initially summon this, unless you use an Exceed monster as material, you're only going to have 1 material, which means you're not going to be able to activate that, so you definitely want to keep that in mind. Also, it's a little bit annoying that it goes to the top of your extra deck after it's destroyed. which means that it's a little bit difficult to recycle it. That's why we play 2. I would even potentially be down to play 3 if I thought there was room in the extra deck. It's just that good. And then the last card is Zeus. I actually forgot Zeus at home on my first weekend with this, and it cost me a match against Ignister. So I went to go make Zeus, and I looked at my extra deck, and I was like, where is he? And I realized I'd just forgotten him and left him at home, which was a huge mistake. So don't be stupid like me and leave your Zeus at home, kids. And that's it for the extra deck. So onto the side deck. I have revised the side deck quite a bit from my first week playing this because I had a lot of redundant cards that were just suboptimal choices that I didn't really think were going to work out very well. I never sided into some of the cards, so I changed up my ratios, and I think this is correct. So we've got 3 Bell, we've got 3 Token Collector, and 3 Lancia. I was playing like some more going second cards like Dark Ruler no more, and I decided to side that out because I didn't think it was that impactful. And so the Bell came in all of the time against the branded matchup. This card was crazy against that. The Lancia I decided to put in over a Dark Ruler just because of the matchups I was having. And then the Token Collector is great in this deck in particular. Hell, it's a Fiend. So there's that. But also, it comes up all the time against Sword Soul with all the Tenyi effects. And it comes up all the time against, obviously, the Adventure Package. So, yeah, Token Collector is crazy. And then we also have, I am playing Chalice because I think Chalice is a pretty great way to kind of go second and shut off a lot of your opponent's effects. You can play into them and without, negating battle damage like Dark Ruler does. So that's kind of my option there. And then some more back row Hate 3 Twins because I did face a lot of back row decks. I did face, again, the Paleo player. There was some Eldritch lurking around somewhere there. Overall, I like the side deck a lot. I wouldn't really change anything there, I don't think. Not right now, at least. So yeah, that's it. So, yeah, absolutely love this deck. Some of the most fun I have ever had playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently. The only thing I will say is just make sure to slow down. Really, what you need to do is look at the second effects of a lot of your DD monsters, because most of them have some kind of floating effect or some kind of condition, and those are the things you have to remember. Like I said, don't be like me and forget to activate your Griffin effect to search when you bring it back from the graveyard. Don't forget about patent license. Don't forget that like both of these have floating effects and stuff like that. That's the part you need to remember. The procedural part of building your board with this and playing through stuff is actually pretty malleable, and there's a lot of different directions you can go with it, and it all kind of depends on your board state. So it's not productive to really like look at a spreadsheet and figure out what the combos are with this deck. It all depends on what you're going up against, like what your matchup is and what they decide to interrupt. So with effects like Valor and Imperm and Ghost Ogre against Gilgamesh is the worst. So if they Ghost Ogre him, it is absolutely catastrophic. So you just need to figure out how to play around that stuff and make sure that you can keep going. And usually you can. Usually this deck has enough gas, it's consistent enough, and it has a strong enough grind game to play through all of that stuff. And like I said, a lot of the floating effects help out with that tremendously. So yeah, I guess the moral of the story at the end of the day is just read your cards. But I wish it was that simple. But anyway, hope you guys enjoy this. I'm going to be working on a few others. And I'll see you guys next time.